Well, I mean, psychology underpins all of our human experiences, but magic is quite unique in that it allows us to experience the impossible. And by doing so, it deals with some of the most fundamental psychological and philosophical questions. It deals with consciousness, it deals with deception, beliefs, free will. And yet, I think, unlike most other art forms, it's received relatively little scientific interest. And what we're trying to do is using scientific methods as a way of understanding why and how magic works, because by exploring some of these principles, we can learn a lot about how the human brain works. So magicians have developed lots of really clever psychological tricks to fool us and create impossible experiences. And as psychologists, we're generally interested in understanding why our brain is tricked, because once you understand why your brain is tricked, you can work out how the brain actually works. And so a lot of our research tries to understand the psychological and neurological mechanisms that underpin a lot of these illusions.
And how does this research, what could it possibly help us with understanding that we could find maybe practical or functional in a day-to-day world? Like what are we learning from this? So to give you an example, with the research that we're doing, let's say with Professor Spence, understanding people's sensory relationship with food in some way may help us with designing maybe better food experiences, or the understanding that we have with, let's say, people's perception of color and taste, or sounds or smells, and how that relates to their experience of food, could, let's say, help us with developing, let's say, better food for children, or better food experiences for the elderly in care homes. Understanding the psychology of magic, what would that lead to? Better magic, or is there another purpose behind it?
I mean, the main purpose of this is not to improve magic. We are studying magic to help magicians as well, but that's very much a small sideline project. Mm-hmm. Our main motivation is to find ways in which we can apply the knowledge that we gain from understanding the science of magic to other domains as well. So, for example, we are studying misdirection and magicians' ability to manipulate what you're seeing. And what this tells us is that we experience much less than we intuitively think that we do, and this has got very important implications for road safety, for example, or any other kind of task where your attention is being distracted. We can think about magic as manipulating your conscious sensory experiences as well, and so in a similar way that Charles Spencer's work on cross-modal perception has important implications for dining experiences, some of these subjective experiences could likewise be implemented in a dining experience, or human-computer interaction. So we are now using magic, trying to understand some of these magic techniques to see whether we can implement these principles in a gaming environment, or enhancing our human-computer interactions as well, or even the deep-rooted emotional experiences that magic elicits. So we've got a project where we trying to see whether we can apply magic, so the experience that magic elicits, but also the process of learning to perform magic, the impact that that can have on people's mental health and well-being. So the overarching aim of the Magic Lab is to try and understand the psychological mechanisms that underpin magic, and then apply this knowledge to domains that are outside the traditional entertainment. I mean, one of the things about magic is because it's so secretive and it necessitates a certain level of secrecy, because otherwise magic doesn't really work. But I think by studying some of these lesser known principles, we are discovering new things. But one of the things that I'm always aware of, and one of the things I feel uncomfortable about as well, is, well, are these principles then really used for the good or for the bad? And that's one of the questions that's always at the back of our mind as well. But I think some advertisers have used, and marketing companies have used, a lot of these principles already.
And what kind of principles are we talking about here in terms of trying to encourage people to, let's say, eat the sugary foods? I guess packaging in terms of the colors and shapes and positioning within the supermarket?
Yeah,
are these the kind of elements you're talking about?
So we've just run some studies where, for example, if I place 4 cards on the table here, and I ask you just simply to touch one, I've selected that card. about 60% of the people will take the card that is third from the left, and they're completely unaware of that bias. And so what this illustrates is that if you actually ask someone to make a choice like that, we can predict which object they will choose. I mean, you could use the same thing probably with chocolate bars as well. But what's interesting about this is that even though these behaviours and these choices are highly predictable, people are generally not aware of the fact that they are behaving in such stereotypical ways, unless we actually encourage them to properly think about them. So if you actually ask them to think about the choice that they're going to be making before they actually make the selection, that significantly reduces some of these biases. So that can be used to get people to make genuinely more freer choices as well, or on the flip side, it can be used to actually influence the objects that they're really choosing.